Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so haunting, that it seemed to cling to you, even after waking? A dream that burrowed into your mind, twisting your sense of reality until you couldn't tell where the nightmare ended and the world began. I'm Aidan Frost, a historian who's spent years studying artifacts from civilizations long gone, unearthing relics that seem to hold fragments of those ancient lives. But there's one artifact I encountered, not in the field, but in my dreams, that I can never forget. It's a cursed ring that has lingered in my thoughts, as if it's watching, waiting. The first time I saw it was in a dream, or so I thought. And what began as a simple nightmare grew into something far darker, something that refuses to let me go. If you're ready to dive into this chilling story of fear and forbidden relics, subscribe to the channel, because the horrors that I'm about to share are not for the faint of heart. It was just another night, or so it seemed. My mind slipped into that strange space between wakefulness and sleep, where shadows are sharp, yet reality is blurred. Suddenly, I found myself standing in an ancient, decrepit room that seemed to pulsate with a dark, hidden energy. Stone walls closed in around me, cracked and covered in symbols I'd never seen before, jagged marks that seemed to almost shimmer with a faint red glow. The air was thick, heavy, carrying a scent of rot and dampness like something long buried. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped forward, each footfall echoing in that strange silence. I felt as if I were being watched, like countless unseen eyes were fixed on me, waiting for something or someone. In the middle of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it lay a ring, an ancient, blackened band. It was simple, but I could feel its darkness from across the room, as if it radiated a malevolent presence. I didn't want to get closer, yet I felt myself drawn toward it, each step more involuntary than the last. The ring's surface was etched with strange symbols, like those on the walls, but older, deeper, as if they had been burned into the metal. My gaze locked onto it, and a whisper, faint but unmistakable, seemed to fill the room. It wasn't in any language I knew, but I could feel the malice, the hunger, as though the ring was calling to me, desperate to be touched, to be claimed. As I reached out, the shadows around me seemed to thicken, pulling me into darkness. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, and a sense of dread gripped me like a vice. I could feel the ring's pull growing stronger, its call almost unbearable, like a whisper seeping into my bones. It wasn't just a dream, it was something much darker, something that felt horribly, terrifyingly real. And in that moment, as my fingers hovered above the cursed ring, I knew that whatever I was about to unleash would follow me back into the waking world. As I moved closer, every instinct in me screamed to turn back, yet I couldn't stop. It felt as though invisible hands were guiding me, tugging me forward with a force too powerful to resist. The ring seemed to pulse, its dark surface absorbing the light around it. And then I noticed something even more chilling. The shadows on the walls had stopped moving. They were frozen, forming grotesque faces, hollow-eyed and twisted in silent agony, as if trapped in an eternal scream. Their hollow eyes followed me as I approached the pedestal, filling me with a creeping horror, a suffocating sense that these shadows were once alive and had been consumed by whatever darkness dwelled in this place. I reached out, my hand trembling, drawn toward the ring as though possessed. Just inches away, I hesitated, feeling the cold radiating from it like a physical presence, a chill that seeped into my bones. The whispers around me grew louder, forming words now, ancient, guttural, promising power, eternity, and a life beyond death. But beneath these promises was an undercurrent of malice, a warning of doom disguised as a lure. My fingers hovered above the ring, and a strange sensation washed over me, like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, one step away from plunging into the unknown. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the last remnants of sanity, and just as I was about to touch it, the shadows on the wall seemed to writhe, twisting as if in warning. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me shifted, the walls pressing closer. I felt the weight of the darkness surrounding me, a suffocating presence that seemed to close in, making it harder to breathe. The floor felt like it was dissolving under my feet, sinking, dragging me down with it. The shadows around the pedestal began to stretch, reaching toward me like claws, dark tendrils twisting and coiling. I was frozen, trapped in a trance, and as I stared into the depths of the ring, I could swear I saw something moving within it, a swirling mist, or perhaps a face, twisted and tormented. It was as though the ring was a doorway, and something on the other side was watching me, waiting for me to make the fatal mistake of crossing its threshold. A piercing scream erupted from somewhere in the darkness, slicing through the silence and shaking me to my core. It wasn't human, It was a raw, unearthly wail that seemed to carry centuries of pain, anger, and despair. My body was paralyzed, held captive by the ring's gaze, and I felt its pull stronger than ever, urging me to put it on, to bind myself to it. But as I fought against the temptation, I felt something brush against my shoulder, a light, almost tender touch, yet colder than death itself. I turned, and in that moment, I caught a glimpse of a figure cloaked in shadow, its face hidden but its eyes glowing faintly, hollow and bottomless, as if they were windows into an endless void. The figure raised its hand, pointing to the ring, and its whisper filled my mind, once claimed, "You are bound. Forever." As I stood there, trembling, the figure vanished, leaving me alone with the cursed ring. Yet, an intense feeling of being watched lingered, as though unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. I turned away from the pedestal, desperate to escape this place, but as I began to walk, something was wrong. The room stretched, twisting impossibly, and the walls seemed to pulsate with a heartbeat of their own. The path back had changed, as if the place itself was alive, a maze that reshaped itself to trap anyone who dared enter. The silence around me was thick, oppressive, and in its depths, I could feel the weight of countless souls, lost, trapped, all victims of this ancient, cursed place. I moved through the dimly lit hall, trying to steady my breathing, but the shadows clung to me, flickering at the edges of my vision. They were no longer faces but grotesque forms, shapes that seemed to writhe and twist, like tortured spirits clawing their way from the walls, straining to reach me. As I tried to ignore them, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, shuffling noise like footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. I stopped, every muscle in my body tensing. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear, but the footsteps were there, slow and deliberate, growing louder, closer, until they stopped just behind me. I didn't dare turn around, feeling an icy presence hovering just inches from my back, breathing, waiting. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned, but the hall was empty. Yet the air was thick, stifling, and the shadows danced more violently now, as though mocking me, relishing my fear. I kept walking, trying to find an exit, but every corner I turned only led me deeper into the endless corridors. My mind was clouded with dread, and each step felt like I was sinking further into something ancient and alive. Doors began to appear on either side of the hallway, each slightly ajar, and from within each room, a dim, unnatural glow spilled out. Whispers echoed through the hall, voices calling my name, their tones a mixture of pleading and anger, warning and invitation. Each voice seemed to belong to someone lost, trapped by the same curse that now ensnared me. Desperation gnawed at me, and in a moment of madness, I opened one of the doors. Inside, the room was bare except for a cracked, dust-covered mirror on the far wall. As I stepped inside, the whispers grew louder, circling around me like a sinister chant. I approached the mirror, feeling an inexplicable compulsion, and stared at my reflection. But the face staring back was not entirely mine. My features were distorted, hollowed, and there, clutched in the hand of my reflection, was the ring. The twisted face in the mirror smiled, an unnatural, hollow grin that stretched too wide, showing teeth that seemed too sharp. It was a version of me twisted by darkness, consumed by the ring's curse. My pulse raced, and I backed away, only to realize that I couldn't move. It felt like an invisible force was gripping me, holding me in place as the mirror's surface rippled, shifting like liquid. My reflection raised its hand, reaching toward the glass, and I watched in horror as its hand passed through, stretching into my reality. The icy fingers brushed against my skin, sending a shock of cold through my body, and a whisper echoed in my mind, clear as if spoken aloud. "You belong to us now." The moment those cold fingers touched my skin, a jolt of raw terror surged through me, freezing me in place. My mind screamed to run, but my body felt paralyzed, anchored by some dark force I couldn't see or understand. My reflection in the mirror twisted, its hollow eyes locked onto mine with an unnatural, predatory hunger. It began to laugh, low, guttural, and filled with a malice that made my blood run cold. The laughter echoed, multiplying until it filled the room, as if every shadow, every surface was mocking me. The mirror itself seemed to pulse, dark veins spreading across its surface, connecting me to the cursed ring that lay in my reflection's grip. It was as though the mirror had become a doorway, a portal linking me to something far darker than any nightmare, a realm of shadows from which there was no escape. Just as I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, I found myself able to move again, and I stumbled backward, desperate to put distance between me and the mirror. But the walls of the room seemed to shift, closing in, suffocating me with a sense of dread that was almost tangible. I turned toward the door, but it had disappeared. Instead, the room stretched and twisted around me, morphing into an endless hallway lined with countless mirrors, each one holding distorted versions of myself, grinning, staring, waiting. Each reflection held the cursed ring in their hand, twisting it, turning it, as if flaunting their ownership over me. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The air felt thick, almost syrupy, and each breath seemed to draw me deeper into the nightmare, binding me tighter to the ring's curse. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I stumbled down the hallway, my eyes flicking from one mirror to the next. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that filled me with a terror so profound I felt my legs weaken. One of the reflections moved independently. I froze, watching as it turned, slowly facing me, its hollow eyes filled with a malice that felt alive, sentient. It raised the hand holding the ring and pointed it directly at me, its mouth twisting into a wicked smile that was not my own. The reflection began to speak, its voice a distorted version of mine, layered with whispers and hisses, as if countless voices were speaking through it. "You came here searching for answers," it sneered, its tone dripping with contempt. "But this place is not for the living. This ring has claimed many before you, and it will claim countless more." The reflection stepped forward, pressing against the glass as if it were a thin veil between our worlds. "You wanted to know its secrets, didn't you?" it taunted. "Now you are bound to them." Suddenly the glass shattered, but instead of falling to the ground, the shards hung suspended in the air, each one reflecting a different face, twisted versions of me, all trapped, all cursed. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my hand, and looked down to see the ring now resting on my finger, cold and heavy, as if it had always belonged there. Panic surged as I tried to pull it off, but the metal seemed fused to my skin, tightening with each attempt, digging into my flesh until blood began to seep from beneath the band. I could feel it, like a pulse, a heartbeat that was not my own, alive, ancient, filling my veins with a dark, consuming energy. The room began to spin, the mirrors blurring together, each twisted reflection merging into one monstrous face that filled my vision. Its mouth opened, releasing a torrent of whispers that wrapped around me, binding me in layers of shadow and despair. I was drowning in darkness, the cursed ring now a part of me, its sinister energy seeping into every corner of my being. And then, with one final, desperate scream that tore from somewhere deep within, I closed my eyes, hoping to wake, to escape. But when I opened them, I was lying in my own bed, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. I thought it was over, that I had finally escaped. But as I looked down, the horror returned. There on my finger was the cursed ring, its dark symbols gleaming faintly in the dim light. Waking up in my bed, drenched in cold sweat, I felt a momentary wave of relief, the kind that washes over you when you escape a nightmare. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, my stomach twisted with a sickening realization. The ring was still there, cold and unyielding on my finger, its dark metal embedded in my skin like it had always belonged. I tried to pull it off, my fingers scraping against it, but it wouldn't budge. It felt almost alive, a strange warmth radiating from it, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Panic clawed at me as I sat in silence, staring at the cursed artifact, trying to rationalize what was happening. Had I brought a piece of the nightmare back into reality? Or was I still trapped within the dream's twisted grasp? Over the next few days, I became obsessed, unable to shake the feeling that the nightmare hadn't ended. My thoughts were consumed by the ring, its origins, and the eerie familiarity of the shadowed halls from my dream. The sensation of being watched persisted, lingering in every shadow, every quiet moment. Desperate for answers, I started researching anything I could find about cursed rings and dark artifacts. I combed through ancient texts, folklore databases, and obscure forums that delved into the supernatural. And then, buried deep within an old archive, I found something, a mention of a cursed ring, rumored to be from an ancient civilization long lost to history. The text was filled with warnings, speaking of a ring that could bind a person's soul, entwining their fate with those who had come before. The more I read, the colder the room seemed to grow, as if the very air was thickening, closing in around me. It was said that anyone who dreamed of the ring would be haunted, marked as the next keeper, forced to bear its curse until another took it from them, willingly or otherwise. The old report spoke of dreamers who, like me, woke to find the ring on their finger, only to be plagued by misfortune, visions, and worse, disappearances. The ring was rumored to have crossed continents, passed through the hands of those desperate enough to risk its curse. Each story ended with tragedy, and the accounts were littered with desperate scrawls of people warning others to stay away, as if they knew their fate was sealed. Determined to find some concrete connection, I began reaching out to locals, diving into any history or legend tied to the area. It didn't take long to uncover a chilling pattern. The old town archives, dusty and forgotten, contained reports of people who had vanished under strange circumstances, each disappearance connected to a tale of cursed dreams and mysterious rings. The descriptions mirrored my own experience too closely, right down to the shadowed figures, the impossible rooms, and the endless feeling of being watched. A photograph caught my eye, a black and white image from decades past, showing a man holding up his hand, a strange ring gleaming on his finger. His eyes were hollow, his face twisted in terror. And beneath the photograph was a name that sent chills through my bones, my own last name, Frost. Realization crashed over me like a wave, chilling me to my core. This wasn't just a random curse or a twisted coincidence. My own family had been bound to this curse, stretching back generations. It was as if the ring had chosen me, calling me back, as if some dark, ancient connection tied us together. It wasn't a new nightmare I was facing. It was a legacy, a bloodline marked by the cursed ring. Driven by the horrifying discovery of my family's connection to the ring, I knew I couldn't rest until I confronted the curse head-on. Days passed in a fog of dread and obsession, each one feeling darker and heavier than the last. I no longer felt safe, even in my own home. Shadows seemed to cling to the walls, growing thicker, more oppressive, as if they were alive, watching and waiting. I'd hear whispers in the dead of night, faint but unmistakable, calling my name from the corners of my room. Sleep became impossible. Whenever I closed my eyes, I felt as if something, or someone, was hovering just over me, its cold presence pressing down, as if eager to claim my last breath. In desperation, I made a decision. I had to return to the place from my dream, to the twisted hallways and endless mirrors that haunted my mind. I had to face the source, wherever it was. Following the clues from my research, I located an abandoned estate on the edge of town, rumored to be a hotspot for paranormal activity and strange disappearances. The old property had been shut down for years, surrounded by local legends of people entering but never leaving, cursed by a force too dark to name. Everything about it fit the fragments of my dreams. The dark stone walls, the ancient doors, even the smell of dampness and decay seemed to linger in my memory. I knew in my bones that this place held the answers, though every instinct told me to turn back. The air grew colder as I approached the crumbling mansion, each step weighted with an almost palpable dread. The gates creaked open with a sound that echoed through the empty grounds, as if the place itself was welcoming me home. Inside, the silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by my own ragged breaths. Every corner of the mansion seemed to watch me, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching unnaturally, forming shapes that shifted just beyond my line of sight. My skin prickled with the sense that I wasn't alone, that something dark and ancient lingered just out of reach, waiting for me to cross an unseen line. As I moved deeper into the mansion, I stumbled upon a room that seemed eerily familiar. It was the room from my dream, down to the cracked mirror hanging on the far wall, reflecting the dim light in fractured patterns. The cursed ring seemed to pulse on my finger, a faint glow emanating from the dark metal, as if it recognized this place. I took a deep breath and forced myself to enter, but as I did, a cold breeze swept through the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I was trapped, sealed in with the suffocating darkness and the whispers that filled the air. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me, a figure moving silently through the shadows. Turning slowly, I saw an old man standing in the corner, his face hollowed by age and terror, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, as if he were trying to warn me of something, his fingers pointing weakly at the ring on my hand. I recognized him from the old photograph I'd found. He was one of my ancestors, one of the cursed keepers of the ring. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and despair, and I realized, with a chill, that he was not truly there. He was a remnant, a ghost bound to the curse, just as I was bound now. The figure began to fade, his form dissolving into the shadows, and in his place, I saw the cursed ring glinting from a pedestal that hadn't been there moments before. It was as if the mansion itself had reshaped to reveal it, offering me the same choice that had doomed so many before me. As I stepped closer, a voice filled my mind, cold and ancient, echoing through the walls. "You are the last," it whispered, the words pressing down on me like a weight. "Claim the ring, accept your fate, and release the others, or face the darkness alone." In that moment, I understood the choice that had haunted each of my ancestors. to bear the curse willingly or to resist and be consumed by it. I felt trapped, torn between the urge to break free and the fear that breaking the bond would unleash something even darker. My hand trembled as I reached for the ring, the final threads of my sanity fraying. And as my fingers closed around the cold metal, the shadows around me erupted into laughter, twisted, mocking, as if the mansion itself were relishing my despair. It was then that I realized I wasn't just facing the curse. I was staring into the heart of it, the place where all of its horrors had begun. And as the walls closed in, suffocating me with the weight of the ages, I knew that whatever choice I made, I was doomed. Standing in that cursed room, the shadows pressing in from all sides, I felt a chill seeping into my bones, a cold that seemed to come not from the air, but from within me, as if the ring itself were draining my warmth, my life. The laughter that filled the room grew louder, each mocking echo reverberating through my mind, feeding the terror gnawing at my soul. On the pedestal before me lay a dusty, ancient book, its leather cover cracked and worn, and resting atop it was an object that both beckoned and repelled me, the cursed ring. It glinted in the dim light, the symbols etched into its surface pulsing faintly, like veins filled with dark energy. But this time there was something else, a faint whisper emanating from it, calling my name, urging me to claim it, to surrender. I reached out, compelled by a force I could barely resist, and as my fingers hovered above the ring, I saw images flash before my eyes. The faces of those who had come before me, their lives twisted by despair and terror, all cursed by the ring. Their hollow eyes stared back, filled with a silent plea, as if begging me to release them from their eternal suffering. And then I understood. This ring was no ordinary artifact. It was a prison, a tomb for the souls it had claimed, trapping them in a cycle of torment. Each keeper had been bound to it, forced to bear its curse until their spirit was broken, consumed, only to join the legion of shadows that now watched me, waiting for me to join them. A heavy book lay beneath the ring, ancient pages brittle with age. Drawn by some twisted curiosity, I opened it, and my blood ran cold as I read the inscriptions, written in a language that seemed to claw at my sanity. The text spoke of a dark ritual, one that could bind a soul to the ring forever, sealing the bearer's fate but, in turn, unlocking a forbidden power. Legends told of those who had tried to resist, who had died or vanished, their souls cursed to wander, bound to the ring for eternity. And in every line, there was a warning. Once chosen, there was no escape. The curse was endless, insatiable, like a dark hunger that would never be satisfied. Suddenly, the room grew darker, and I felt a presence at my back, cold, heavy, a force that pressed down on me, whispering, "Finish it. Take the ring. It is your destiny." I spun around, but the shadows only deepened, coalescing into a figure draped in black, its face obscured, except for eyes that burned with a hollow light, empty and yet filled with a knowledge that defied understanding. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing to the ring, its voice scraping through the silence like nails on stone. "One of us, or one with us. Choose." The words twisted in my mind, each syllable dripping with a promise of despair, as if my fate had been decided long ago. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body was frozen, anchored by an unseen force. My fingers moved on their own, reaching toward the ring, and the moment I touched it, a surge of icy fire tore through me, burning away every thought, every hope. I could feel the darkness seeping into me, filling every crevice of my soul. I was no longer just holding the ring. I was becoming part of it, merging with the cursed artifact that had claimed so many before me. In the twisted depths of my mind, I saw flashes of what lay within the ring's prison. Endless halls of shadow, faces frozen in silent screams, trapped souls stretching into infinity. Just as the last thread of my will began to fray, I noticed something, a symbol etched into the book beneath the ring, a mark of release. A single word glowed faintly, as if waiting for someone brave enough to break the cycle. Summoning every ounce of strength, I forced myself to pull my hand away from the ring, pressing my palm against the symbol. The shadows around me screamed, writhing as if burned, their fury filling the air with a rancid stench. The figure in black lunged toward me, its face contorted in rage, but as my hand connected with the symbol, a blinding light erupted from the book, swallowing everything. When the light faded, I found myself standing in the middle of an empty room, the pedestal gone, the shadows dissipated. The ring lay on the floor, dull and lifeless, its power seemingly broken. I took a breath, feeling the weight lift, but in my heart, I knew it wasn't over. The curse had been contained, not destroyed. The ring's energy pulsed faintly, as if waiting, watching, knowing that someday, someone else would find it, and the nightmare would begin again. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on a cold hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my senses. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, I tried to piece together how I had ended up here, but my memory was a blur, fragmented, like shattered glass reflecting too many images at once. The only clear memory was the ring, that cursed, malevolent ring, and the shadows that had nearly swallowed me whole. My hands shook as I instinctively looked down, expecting to see the ring still fused to my finger. But my hand was bare. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting, a hollow comfort that quickly soured as I remembered the weight of its curse, lingering like a stain on my soul. As the days passed, the world around me felt different, darker, as if an invisible shroud had settled over everything. Shadows seemed to cling to the edges of my vision, shifting and stretching whenever I looked away. I began noticing strange marks, symbols scratched into surfaces, on the walls of my room, in the condensation on my bathroom mirror, even etched faintly into the wooden desk by my bed. They were the same symbols I had seen in my nightmare, carved into the ring and the ancient book. It was as if the curse was still with me, trailing behind like a specter, impossible to escape. Each night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a presence lingering in the dark just beyond my sight. And in those quiet hours, I'd hear whispers, faint, broken words that seemed to come from within, reminding me that the curse was far from over. One evening, I found a photograph slipped under my door, its edges worn and faded. It was an image of my own reflection, my face twisted in terror, staring back at me with hollow, sunken eyes. In the photograph, my hand was raised, and on my finger glinted the ring, dark and sinister, as if mocking me. But I knew I hadn't taken that picture. It was impossible. My heart pounded as I turned the photograph over, finding a message scrawled in jagged handwriting, once claimed, never escaped. Panic surged through me, and I tore through my room, searching for any sign of intrusion, but I was alone, locked in a silent horror that seemed to stretch into eternity. Desperate for answers, I revisited my family's records, poring over documents and photographs, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain why this curse had chosen me. Among the faded letters and yellowed papers, I uncovered an old journal belonging to my great-grandfather, the man from the photograph in the archives. His entries grew more erratic over time, filled with references to shadows and whispers, to dreams that mirrored my own. In his final entry he wrote, "I tried to rid myself of it, to pass the curse, but it follows, always watching. The ring is bound to our blood, tied to our souls, and it will never let us go." As I read those words, a chill ran down my spine, and a horrifying realization dawned on me. I hadn't broken the curse. I had only delayed it, shifted its focus. The ring wasn't just an artifact. It was a parasite, feeding off fear, binding itself to those who dared to confront it. And I knew that, even if I never saw it again, the curse would always be with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Perhaps it would return in my dreams, or maybe, one day, I'd wake up and find it back on my finger, sealing my fate. The whispers grew louder, clearer, as if the walls themselves were speaking, echoing with the voices of all those who had come before me. "It is not over," they seemed to say, each word laced with a sinister certainty. My family had tried to resist, to escape, but the ring always returned, always found a way to reclaim its hold. And as the shadows lengthened around me, filling the corners of the room, I felt the weight of my lineage, the legacy of terror and despair passed down through generations. If you're watching this, heed my warning. Some nightmares do not end when you wake. Some curses cling to your blood, your very soul. The ring waits, silent and patient, for its next victim. If you ever find yourself dreaming of ancient rooms, of twisted shadows and hollow eyes, if you ever feel the cold weight of metal against your skin, remember, you cannot escape it. You can only delay the inevitable. Subscribe to the channel and share this story. Maybe, just maybe, if enough people know, the curse can be broken. And to those who feel they are being watched, who hear whispers in the dead of night, take caution. Because sometimes, the things we encounter in dreams are only the beginning, and the curse that haunted my family for generations might very well be coming for you next.